What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Ranks, giving you another podcast looking at the career of one Kendrick Lamar Duckworth. Dave, my trusty co-host, is here to talk all about it. Dave, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Love me some Kendrick Lamar. Love Kung Fu Kenny. It's quite the career to look back on. We wanted to wait until the long-awaited album Post Dam came out. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers finally came out this year in 2022. So after some time with that, we can now really dive into that discography thus far because it's been quite the impact so far.
Yeah, it's in listening back to a lot of these records to just kind of reflect on what Kendrick has meant within our lifetimes as an artist. Really, I mean, coming into his own when we're in college, when we are at our probably peak of like finding new music, really wanting to connect with music that spoke to us, and to see him go from being this, like kind of little known rapper, kind of up and coming, to really asserting himself as what some people would probably say is the most influential rapper of the last decade, um, maybe of the 20th century. I think there's an argument to be made. So there's a lot to dive into here. Um, as we work our way through, if you're listening and enjoying, hit that subscribe on youtube.com/nostalgiapod. And also you can find our podcast through our link tree on our Twitter at nostalgiapod and listen to it any way you want to there. But Dave, why don't we just start off talking about, tell me, when was the first time you remember really being aware of Kendrick?
Yeah, it's tough for me to place it exactly, but I remember the general gist was that I had seen the ADHD music video posted on the blogs sometime in 2011. I'm not sure if it was right when it came out. I want to say I came to Kendrick. It might have been after Section 80 was already out in 2011. I'm not exactly sure. It was around that time. ADHD was the first song I heard. And I remember shortly around there as well, I, discovered, Schoolboy Q and Absol and J Rock, and just became aware of all of Black Hippie and their connection to each other and what TDE, Top Dog Entertainment, was at that time. And it obviously really grabbed me like it grabbed so many people. So I was ready for Good Kid, M.A.A.D City, and I did hear that when that did come out. So sometime before then, 2011 sometime.
Yeah, so Good Kid, Mad City was probably when that dropped. That's when he really became a part of my awareness. And I mean that that drops in October of 2012, so that's your junior year, my senior year of college. And I remember just starting to hear a lot of the songs just popping up everywhere. Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, Swimming Pool Full of Liquor. Like, these songs just started being played at parties, just started to be played when we're playing video games, just hanging out, and he started to be everywhere. And I think when he really, really like burst onto the scene for me was the fucking Problems video. That
Ah,
song was
yeah.
just such a, like, the music video and the song in general was just like everywhere. And I just really remember being like, when his verse comes on, the whole song literally stops, and it's just like Kendrick is about to
Right.
light this song on
The
fire.
finale.
Yeah, and he turned the pep talk into a pep rally, and ever since then he's been very prominent in my music listening uh, behaviors. So yeah, that college time, I really remember seeing him, and then that summer 2013, he performed at Firefly, which he was performing everywhere that summer. Obviously on the Good Kid, Mad City um, tour, and he was incredible, but also like a pretty short set. I think he had maybe like 45 minutes. He played
Hmm.
his verse from fucking Problems, I think, to open and close the set, which was a bit of an interesting choice, but he also just probably felt like that he needed to have a banger to open and close with. And yeah, he just absolutely like took over from there for me. So that was my first memory of him. But after you found out about him, did you go back and listen to any of his early stuff before he was releasing under Kendrick?
Yeah, I did. Around that time, I definitely listened to Overly Dedicated then. because that was easy to hear. It was available for free to download at the time on all the mixtape platforms. So I definitely heard Overly Dedicated at the time. Between that and Section 80, there was a lot to really gravitate towards. And then years later was when I looked further for the other stuff that was a bit harder to find. Not hard to find. You just had to actually like look for it a little bit more, which is all the stuff really pre-overly dedicated. Kendrick Lamar EP, and then all the stuff under the K.Dot name. Most famously would probably be the C4 mixtape, which was a really obvious like homage to Lil Wayne's The Carter 3 at the time. Um, and yeah, it was kind of fun to revisit like the early Kendrick, like the teenage Kendrick music later on after hearing the greatness that would follow it, to then go back and hear his like early form. It's not exactly stuff I dig too much, but you can obviously hear the promise, and there are some highlights from that time. I think his very famous freestyle over Kanye's Monster comes to
Mm.
mind. But yeah, I think most people would probably correctly start with Overly Dedicated if you really wanted to jump to the beginning. The beginning that really matters.
Yeah, so as you reflect on Overly Dedicated, and I'll say I haven't really heard a lot of that stuff before Overly Dedicated, so I can't really speak to it too much. I mean, what's your like lasting memory of Overly Dedicated as an album?
Yeah, well, I think about it pretty similarly to Section 80 because again, I heard them both after the fact or around the same time. And even though he would go on to have to do bigger and better things and become much more famous, much more commercial, all that stuff, it is kind of cool to hear him in his early 20s really put himself front and center with this introspective and also worldly music, and
Mm.
the big highlight would be, of course, Ignorance is Bliss, which got the attention of one Dr. Dre, which ultimately led to Kendrick working on Detox at the time when that was still happening. And of course, Kendrick signing to Aftermath and Interscope alongside TDE. So, I think it's not something I like to revisit. I think some of his lyrics of that time can come across as a bit dated, just in terms of his perspectives. There's like some really like big-minded thoughts on OD and Section 80, but he just became, I think, a more intelligent songwriter later on. So yeah, I think you kind of really have to be digging it. At the same time, though, it does remind me a bit of like conscious, like jazz rap of the 2010s. It definitely feels like of that early 2010s time. It does not feel modern, so in a sense, it's cool to go back to. But yeah, I think more than anything, it's in by design, as you'd expect, early Kendrick. So it's still instructive, but there's better things to come, obviously.
Yeah, I think the way you described it is perfect. You can hear a lot of like the seeds of what's to come, but it still feels like an older Kendrick record and just not as refined. There's a lot of like flourishes in production from that time that just are like so singular to that era. Like you can kind of hear the influence that like graduation or 808s like had at this point. It's
Mhm.
just like these like really overproduced songs, and then you hear where Kendrick ends up with things like "To Pimp a Butterfly" or "Untitled Unmastered," and you're like, oh yeah, he went in like a completely opposite direction from this like highly produced, well, produced in a different way type stuff, like more
Yeah.
organic type sounding. Um, yeah, and for me, I think "Ignorance is Bliss" was definitely the one that I kind of took away, but you listen to something like "Opposites Attract," which
Mhm.
you listen and you're like, okay, you hear where a lot of the Kendrick influence is coming or is going to go. That more jazz rap, like you talked about, that like West Coast feel to a lot of it.
For
So
sure.
there's a lot to, I think, like if you are a Kendrick fan, but again, like you said,
Right.
not one that I think made people come back to a lot.
Yeah, at the time I really liked HOC, High Off Contact. Good example of him having a more lyrical message on a song early on. Uh, PNP 1.5 featuring Absol is actually just lifted directly from the Kendrick Lamar EP. It's the same song,
Mhm.
just repackaged there. Average Joe is pretty solid. Opposites Attract. And Heart Part 2, notably, because that's the
Mm.
one song in the Heart series that's actually on an official project. Obviously, everything from here on out will be a promo single to prelude, an upcoming project. But the hard part two actually is on Overly Dedicated, and
Yeah,
there's better part X's to come as well.
definitely. Um, so this drops what I think it's 2011 or 2010 actually. This
2010,
drops.
September 2010. The Kendrick Lamar EP was New Year's Eve '09. That was his first release under the Kendrick Lamar name, and then about 9 months later, Overly Dedicated comes out, which and that was just a TDE release, independent, no aftermath or Interscope just yet. And then less than a year later, July 2011 is when Section 80 comes out.
Yeah, Section 80, I think, uh, rightfully is considered his debut album. Um, Obviously, like you mentioned, he's uh, working with Top Dog as the label at this point, which will, you know, conjoin with Aftermath and Interscope moving forward. Section 80 really puts him on the map, though. You know, the first album he or project he puts out that hits a Billboard top chart, even if it's just the rock and R or the sorry the rap and R&B
Mm-hmm.
chart. I think he got all the way up to like 72 on that chart, which you know for him at that time was big. And he has a
Yeah.
couple of songs that really pop off.
Yeah, I mean, it's still effectively an independent release. That was just with Top Dog, which Top Dog had no like major distribution at that time. So,
Mhm.
uh, independent release with no major backing, and it made a huge impact on the internet and really grew Kendrick's status. You know, he later this year will be on Drake's Take Care on a
Mm.
solo song, Buried Alive interlude, and then of course would join Drake on the Club Paradise tour the following year. Section 80, and then Fucking Problems coming out the year after, as you said. All of that is what builds up this hype to Good Kid, M.A.A.D City, which then has this huge commercial blow up in its first week. But he did all this with like genuine word of mouth off an independent release with an independent label.
Really impressive. And you know the thing is he had a couple of songs on here that just absolutely level up from overly dedicated, right? So like you mentioned, ADHD I think is head and shoulders above almost anything that's on overly dedicated. High Power, which is one
Mm.
of the other singles from this, I think is another track that really stands out. And this is kind of where I feel like Kendrick starts to lean more into his own influences rather than like the influences of hip hop at the time. You know, you still hear some of those songs every once in a while on here that feel very much of that time, but because he's leaning more into the more instrumental and studio like produced music that's kind of going for like more classical drums, more jazz sounding, it starts to feel a little bit more timeless and it starts to feel more in line with what we're going to get on Good Kid, Mad City, and whatnot. When you think back to this, other than ADHD, what songs really pop off for you?
Yeah, I think ADHD stands out because that's a song with a message, lyrical as you expect from Kendrick, but also catchy and almost radio friendly. It was not a radio song,
Mm,
but you could have heard it on there, you know. Um, and I think there's a bunch of other highlights, of course, too. You mentioned High Power, notably produced by J. Cole, their first collaboration of many
yeah.
across multiple projects, multiple loose songs as well. We never got the Kendrick J. Cole collab album that they teased over the course of many years, maybe one day. But that's actually where it starts with High Power, and Cole actually kind of helped connect Kendrick to Dre, which is something I wasn't actually that aware of until recently. Where Dre's from Compton, Kendrick's from Compton. Surely this is just the old generation helping the new generation, but actually Cole, who was a bit more established at the time, helped connect the two. Funny enough, Rigor Mortis though I think really stands out for like a technical uh, freestyle almost rapping ability from Kendrick. And of course, we'd see this uh, leveled up soon with Backseat Freestyle on Good Kid, Mad City. But Rigor Mortis, right off the bat, it's like, yeah, like Kendrick also like can really rap his ass off. You know, if you weren't listening to those early K.Dot mixtapes, maybe you didn't pick up on that just so much. You thought he was a bit dusty, a bit jazzy off OD and Section 80. But no, listen to Rigor Mortis, that is not true either. Um, Ronald Reagan era, I think, stands out for like the most societal comment one. I think that one is
Yeah.
aged better than "Fuck Your Ethnicity," which I think is kind of half baked
Yes.
ultimately. I like the song at the time, but I think Ronald Reagan era has kind of lasted better.
Yeah, I had the same feel listening back last night that like fuck your ethnicity. I think I like what he's going for on it, but it didn't ultimately like kind of get there. But Ronald Reagan era is so singular. I feel like in the Kendrick catalog, it has kind of you've heard the drums in other Kendrick songs, but that like
Mm.
beginning that is almost kind of like a I don't even know like cowboyish type feel to it. Like I mean, obviously speaking to Ronald Reagan's, I think like persona. I think of it as what he was alluding to, but
War on drugs, all
it's
that.
just something that you don't really hear that sort of vibe in other songs. And then it goes into a more traditional sound, but it really stood out in listening back on this. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think listening through this is a pretty like formed album. That's maybe not as cohesive as a lot of what you're gonna get, but for someone who at the time is, I mean, what he's 24 when this drops,
Mm.
uh, pretty impressive to put something like this together, and quite a few guests on this that will I think be around, right? So I think Schoolboy Q's on this, BJ the Chicago Kid, Ab Soul, obviously who he has quite a few collaborations with. So a lot of people on this, which is nice to see. People giving that cosign.
Right. Probably most notably be RZA on Ronald
Right.
Reagan era. Like obviously hearing
Yes.
Q and J Rock and Solo makes sense. Obviously with the Black Hippie TD connection, and they definitely collaborated more around this time than they would do later on. But yeah, having RZA on your album, having a J Cole beat at that time when Cole was actually doing a lot of producing. Um, yeah. I mean, I think Dr. Dre actually mixed
Hmm.
uh, High Power, if I remember right too. So yeah, I think Section 80 kind of has got a bit of like a life of its own on the internet these days, where there's some people, some Kendrick fans, like really ride for it as
Yeah.
like one of like the pinnacles of the Kendrick catalog, and will rank it above uh, entries that are more recent. And I think those people are quite passionate. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I think it does speak to that there is a lot of qualities and good songs that have lasted from this album. I just think overall the body of work, it's kind of hard for me to rank this above what would come next.
Yeah, it's a good album for what's to come, but man, when you have the kind of career Kendrick has, and you're, this comes out in July of 2011, and then we're getting about a year and a couple months, like year and change later,
Hmm.
Good Kid, Mad City, which is when Kendrick just completely establishes himself as a force in the music world. Um, Not only for having multiple songs that are going to be played on the radio, be
Right.
Billboard hits, but creating an album that is cohesive and tells a story and has political and social commentary that's thoughtful and some I think really well formulated critiques. It's just a really impressive record no matter who it came from, but I think especially because we hadn't seen Kendrick put out something this cohesive before, it's like holy shit, this guy, his ceiling has completely lifted.
Yeah, well, absolutely. If this is the first album with major backing, and right off the bat, it sells 242,000 first week, just like that. Kendrick is a significant commercial force in hip hop, and he's doing it with a honest to goodness concept album. It's very personal, yet still very familiar in its West Coast sound rap album, and like you said, stuff would hit the radio, stuff like Swimming Pools, and on less mainstream radio stuff like Backseat Freestyle, and then songs just kind of crossing over in a sense, like Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe.
Yeah.
It, it's just kind of funny to hear, see all that happen alongside an album that also has stuff like Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, and just like really like dense storytelling tracks. But and quickly, of course, Mad City, the song, would become one of those bangers, one of those classic DJ drops at this
Yeah.
time as well. And uh, as people remember, this album the following year would lead Kendrick to get multiple Grammy nominations. I believe it was 7, including Best New Artist, Best Rap Album. He actually didn't win anything, of course, because that was the Macklemore moment. And as we all know, Macklemore felt bad about it too, because Macklemore, to his credit, was a real hip hop fan and was like, you know what, Kendrick is better than me. And
Man,
that was tough, and people have relitigated that a lot. Kendrick's relationship to the Grammys, and he will win Best Rap Album the next 2 times out. But yeah, I think I mean, Good Kid, Mad City, in a sense, it's funny to think that it's about to be 10 years old.
yeah,
That's the part that's kind of wild to me. Um,
yeah, you're old, man.
yeah, I guess. Yeah, I remember hearing this. This came out the day before my birthday in 2012, and was really hyped for it, and definitely something that is listened to constantly at that time. And actually, just looking back, before this came out, and even before Section 80 came out, Kendrick made XXL Freshman. Really speaks to
Yes,
how XXL used to function, where it was truly like a finding people on the come up thing. Kendrick was on XXL before Section 80 came out. He was not super well known. But listen to this list. These are his peers on XXL
yes.
2011. Sci-Hi the Prince, Mac Miller, Meek Mill, Big Crit, YG, and Lil B the Bass God. Like an absolutely loaded list. Pretty
It
awesome.
it's insane because I mean, prior to this, so what, 2011, there's a show in LA where Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and the Game come out, and they're like,
Yep.
he's the king of the West Coast. Like he's already anointed by
Right.
all the OGs on the West Coast of the West Coast scene. Pretty much everybody at this point is talking about him. But yeah, to be included on
Hmm.
that list, and for so many people on that list to pop off the way it did, it's like the rap scene at that time was just insane. I think XXL seems to do this like every like 3 or 4 years, just have like this insane year where they have like
Hmm.
four or five people that are just going to be in the game for a long time. They had one I think a couple of years back, whichever one Polo G was on, I think was like really stacked
Yes.
too, if I remember.
2019 or 20. Yeah, that was a good
Yeah,
one.
so it just seems to happen, but he's just really blowing up, and then for it all to just like actually come to fruition on Good Kid, Mad City is insane. And
Hmm.
you go down the list, and I'm just trying to like find the song here that's like not good. It's like Shireen, I guess. The first track maybe is one I don't really like go back to a
Hmm.
lot, and maybe Real and Compton. I'm like, those are fine, but
Yeah,
like,
I would say the songs were Dre, honestly. Compton and
yeah,
even the Recipe more. Recipe was like kind of like a
mm,
weird promo single before the album came out. Even though he has Dre actually performing on the songs, those are, I think, some of the weaker entries. This was fun though because at this time, this was still when like bonus tracks were like a big deal on like go get the CD at Target for some new bonus tracks, or like they would come out in iTunes after the fact. The bonus tracks for Good Kid, Mad City are really sick because you have the Swimming Pools Black Hippie remix with Q,
mhm.
Soul, and J Rock, and you have the same thing for the Recipe, and then you have the official remix to Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe featuring Jay Z,
Yeah.
which is actually the sequel to the unreleased original version of Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe featuring Lady Gaga. Like, there's just a lot of fun, like, what ifs with Good Kid, Mad City. In addition to the fact that it's like one of those like incredible records that has really lasted. I had Money Trees on my best songs of the 2010s list. The J Rock verse is amazing, but so is Kendrick too. Um, Honestly, I think one other song that I don't really listen to all that much would be "Poetic Justice" with Drizzy
Ah,
Drake. Kind of Drake returning the favor after having Kendrick on Take Care, going on tour with Kendrick. Then you get Drake on your debut album. It was a big deal at the time for sure. Um, and it's I think it's just a bit softer. Like it's just really not what I like with some of the other stuff on the album, but there's just so many fun flourishes. Like I love the way the art of peer pressure starts too. I find that song very catchy in the beginning.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, people know at this point how good has been, but like I said, it's kind of wild to realize that it's been that long since it came out.
Yeah, and just to put the point on those bonus tracks, and just I think that like final anointing, you get to Mary J. Blige just come on and sing on Now or Never. Like
Hmm.
that's a pretty insane like guest verse. She doesn't do a lot of that sort of stuff, so pretty awesome. Also, just in looking through the people who are on this, MC8 really stands out because it's like you have these huge people, then you have MC8, which is successful in his own right, but not quite to the level of Drake and Jay Z and Dr. Dre. I guess Anna Wise also on Real stands out for the same
Right.
reason, but
Yep.
yeah, good Kid, Mad City, a really good album. If people didn't know,
Right. I think it's also important to point out that early 2012 was when the Kendrick song Cartoons and Cereal leaked, featuring
Mhm.
Gunplay. That was supposed to be on the album. He said it would still make the album, and it didn't. Although he did end up closing a lot of sets at the time with it. I actually did see him perform that song. And that is actually one of his most heralded songs of this period. And it's actually just an unreleased track. Um, I think, the year before you had the Look Out for Detox song from Kendrick on a Donald Glover, Childish Gambino beat of all people too. You have West Side Right on Time, this promo single that doesn't make the album. Like all the loose Kendrick songs at this time are also bangers, it's just that kind of reminds me of like a different time in hip hop too, pre-digital streaming platforms, where like it was more the Wild West on the internet, where like
yeah.
stuff would come out and like stuff wouldn't be super promoted, not monetized at all. It's just a very different time. But between like the black hippie remixes to the songs and the unreleased stuff, it was just really fun to really follow stuff with hip hop at that time.
Good Kid, Mad City peaks at number 2 on the Billboard Top 100 of the
Mhm.
U.S. charts. Right, it's the
Yeah.
last Kendrick album that's going to be lower than one, and that starts 2.5 years later with Pimp a Butterfly. And for most people, Good Kid, Mad City is their magnum opus. That's the album people are saying nothing's ever going to top that. He's going to make good stuff, but like nothing will ever reach that height. To Pimp a Butterfly, widely regarded as Kendrick's best album, his magnum opus, just an absolutely almost perfect album. I think some people would say. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it was number one on like Pitchfork's albums of the decade, number one for many people for albums of the decade.
Hmm.
Dave, does Pimp a Butterfly deserve to be above Good Kid, Mad City?
Yeah, I think so. Plenty of people would switch it, and I think there's perfectly fine argument and opinion to having Good Guy Mad City first. They're both masterpieces, but for such different reasons. I think it really
Yeah.
comes down to what you value more. I do like Timid a Butterfly more. I had it as my number two album of the 2010s, and yeah, March 2015. I remember this album coming out very vividly for
Mm.
sure. There's a ton of hype for this. It sold over 300,000 first week, and Kendrick, Good Kid, Mad City gets all the flowers, doesn't get the Grammys, and it's like, what's going to happen next? And then it's about a year after the Grammys when this happens, and I don't know. I don't want to say it was like unexpected because, like we said, there were hints of Kendrick being an artist that is thoughtful in this manner back in the day with a song like Ronald Reagan era or whatever, right? But
Mhm.
to get something so macro and specific about the time, the way you get with Tim Pimp a Butterfly, an album about blackness and about how society treats black people, um, and getting into that in a whole variety of ways and bringing all kinds of talent to make an album that sounds super jazzy, right? Having Thundercat really come into your circle at this point. Kamasi
Mm.
Washington flexing on people with a George Clinton feature. It's listen to a song like I or King Kunta, and like you
Yeah.
really get that vibe, right? But I'm always just really struck with just how like well he executes the commentary that kind of surrounds this album, song to song, lyric to lyric, and that's why to me it's so impressive. But there's also just one-off songs on this that are awesome to revisit and play. Look no further than "Be All Right," which is like this signature protest song of the last 10 years. You know,
Yeah. All right in and of itself is a masterpiece, but to play the role it does on this album, and you talked about like how this album is such an exploration of identity as a black man in America, black people in the world. I think it's really really incredibly executed. And um I think what like I was most struck by listening back to this is just like the album flows so well, and there's obviously a few tricks that he's employing to do so. You know, at the end of a lot of the songs, he starts reciting this poem and adding lines to the poem as you go through, and it kind of all comes to a head at the end when he finally recites the whole thing, and that kind of wraps up the album. But it just is just incredible how this feels like it could be one singular like thing. If it was just you have to listen to the whole album the whole way through, it's enjoyable. You can pick out certain songs. Probably my favorite one is although I do wish it wasn't the live version on the album anymore. I wish it
Mm,
was kind of the old
totally
one.
agree.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, the
the
single
live
version.
version. I get why they go for it, but the single is so good. Um, but yeah, all right, King Kunta, I think in general is just like an absolute
Yeah,
banger, and the meaning behind it, you know, in terms of like how it relates back to things from like the slave trade and whatnot.
right.
It's just really
Yeah.
really impressive to pull it all together.
Yep, totally. I mean, Wesley's Theory, the way that
Yeah.
song starts off, super catchy, right? But
Yep.
I mean, just getting down to it, like institutionalized and the blacker the berry,
Mm,
hood politics. He's like really getting into some stuff on this, and kind of has this like really immaculate closer with Mortal Man as well. It's a long outro song. Um, yeah, I mean, it's kind. I mean, in terms of like 2 album runs in hip hop, it's a very short list of people that compare.
mhm.
To, and it's not his first 2 albums, of course. Technically, Section 80 precedes these, but like these 2 in a row. Um, I mean, no one really pushed back when like it just became Drake, Kendrick, and Cole. Because like
Mhm.
Kendrick came up with an unconventional manner with a lot less hype and was really a West Coast denizen for so much of his early come up. And J. Cole was famous for several years before Kendrick was, and Drake, of course, was so famous for several years.
Mhm.
And uh, like comeback season Drake. I mean, Kendrick's a nobody. He's touring. He's like opening up for the Game at the time as K.Dot
Yeah.
at that time. They're just so different. And then Kendrick just, through the sheer force of will and artistry, is able to plant himself uh, in that top tier of current rappers, and he's doing it with this uncompromising music that is somehow becoming commercial and
Mhm.
mainstream. And that's probably like what's so amazing about Kendrick above all else, is that he is able to make this music and find like that mainstream commercial success and acceptance in a
Yeah.
way other rappers that do this sort of thing just don't.
Yeah. That critical acclaim that he was able to grab, you know, I think when I think about like rappers, I think only Kanye has really ever been in, at least in our lifetimes, been in that same sphere of being critically lauded while also people just being like, this music is fucking awesome and we want to play it back all the time. I guess maybe also like Outcast, but that was kind of like like a little bit before our time. Um,
Hmm.
but Jay Z, I think also with 444, you know, in the time that we've been doing this, kind of comes to mind for that. But like Drake and other people in that sphere, I think J. Cole doesn't have the replayability on a lot of his tracks. Some of it he does, but like in terms of full albums, I don't know. Not the two
Right.
album run. So
We ranked both Drake's and J. Cole's album discography, so check those out if you're interested. But yeah,
check
I
it
think,
out.
I mean, and Kanye's as well. Obviously, the Kendrick run is. I mean, again, people know. I feel
People
like
know. Yeah, we're not saying anything new.
people know. Um, and yeah, man. I mean, at this point, what happens next, I think, is a bit unexpected to me. Which
Mhm.
is Untitled Unmastered, kind of coming out of the blue, perhaps at
Yeah.
LeBron James's a suggestion on Twitter publicly after hearing these songs privately. So the story goes. So the tweets are read, and you get this compilation album of unreleased demos from the Pimp A Butterfly session. So you understand what they sound like and what the vibe is going for, but they are unfinished tracks. And this is kind of an abstract project to me that I don't spend a lot of time with, But like Section 80, there are a lot of like Untitled and Mastered heads out there. People really ride for this, and I've never totally gotten it. I don't know about you. This came out only a year later, March 2016.
So I think we had actually started doing the podcast when this happened, right? I believe.
Gosh, that's right. Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
the third or fourth episode. This came out right after Pablo. That's right.
Yes. So we actually talked about this. Go back and find that
God,
review somewhere.
that was a
But
while ago.
yeah, it's I think at the time I was like, yeah, this is a lot of like really cool sounding stuff, but like as a as an album, it obviously doesn't work because there's no cohesiveness to it. Um,
Mhm.
and listening back just for this, I just was struck by how like like the level that these songs are on for being unfinished and this being non-cohesive. A lot of these songs are really awesome. Like Untitled number 3, I think
Mhm.
is really great. Like a clear standout for me. I like, obviously, I think Untitled 7 is probably the one that has had a
Yeah.
lasting like impact in
Yeah. Levitate, levitate.
exactly. But
That was actually an official single, the only one.
these are just like tracks that all of them are really good and probably could have been on an album, but he just had these and he's like, well, just put them together and put them out. What other like rap artist has this? Like it's just
Right.
unreal. And it's not only like the level of like the songs, but like the musicianship on these is incredible. Like these are just great acoustic songs without any vocals on it in general. So
Right. Yeah, and in a sense, it makes sense that that's
yeah,
the case because of the sessions these are coming from, the time that these were recorded. And I think my takeaway remains that, like you were saying, these are better than other artists' best songs, which just speaks to Kendrick's talent. When compared to Kendrick's actual body of work himself, his lofty standards, they don't really compare to much else to me. But it is a cool kind of like peek under the hood of like that process, but also just like Kendrick starting on second base with most of his music.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. Even just looking back at the Pimp A Butterfly list, I didn't even realize that like Sufjan Stevens has like song credits on there or writing
I didn't even
credits
know
on
that.
there.
Wow.
Pharrell Williams is one of the producers on All Right and writers on it. It's like these are just people that are just kind of like thrown in for a song or two there. He's got everybody working with him. But yeah, Untitled Unmastered kind of came and went for me, but it was like a nice like way to kind of bridge that Kendrick gap because for a while he's putting out albums every year, and then between Good Kid, Mad City, it's a 2.5 year wait, and then between Pimp Butterfly and Damn, it's another 2.5 year wait. So
Hmm.
it's nice to get something from Kendrick, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Never
especially
hurts.
after the wait post dam that we just experienced.
Yeah, 5 years. So um, why don't we move forward to Damn though? Because I think as I was listening back, I have a very clear memory of listening to Damn, driving in the car, thinking about our conversation we were going to have about it. And in listening back, I don't think I liked Damn as much as I did at the time. And I think I think there's some songs on it that really hit, and then there's some songs that I just really did not connect with. And
Hmm.
there's one in particular we'll get to. But what was your experience listening back for this?
Yeah, so I've kind of like determined this take a while ago. Like when Mr. Morale came out, it's like, yeah, everyone was really fucking with Damn. His most commercial release to date, his biggest album to date, 600,000 first week. Obviously, different sales rules back then, but still, monster first week. Kendrick at his commercial peak, arena tours at this time. Humble, his first number one song. Previously, Swimming Pools, quite impressively, got to like number 17. But Humble was like a honest to goodness, like number one smash on Billboard Hot 100 mainstream song, right? This was Kendrick's commercial nature, and I think the fanfare for Damn was that even though this was like mainstream commercial Kendrick and very re-listenable and fun, it also still has all the Kendrick intelligence that you want and
Mhm.
expect from someone of his talent with his pedigree to this point. And I still really like it, but I don't think the album Damn compares as well to Good Kid, Mad City and Pimp Butterfly as records. it is in a sense a quite personal album, like Good Kid, M.A.A.D City. He gets more insular again after To Pimp a Butterfly with Damn, but I think you're right. There are some tracks that I don't really like too much on this, but man, I mean, I think the highlights of Damn are just some bangers. To be clear.
Yeah, I think these have some of the more radio friendly Kendrick singles on it.
Mhm.
Obviously you mentioned Humble. I think DNA is a clear standout from this time. I really like Love featuring Sakari, Loyalty with Rihanna. I mean,
Oh yeah,
these tracks are great. Element, another track I
yeah, love
really
Element.
love. But then you get tracks like Triple X featuring you too, and I'm just like, what's happening here? Like, why are you doing this? Um, I think also not as many features on this, right? And so there's like a bit of a direction shift for Kendrick.
Hmm.
I think I maybe could have used a few more of his collaborators on this. It's also like a sonic shift, right? In terms of like the sound he's going for. A lot of it is a little bit more like um traditional hip hop sounding rather than that jazz infused at points. So
Hmm.
what songs were you thinking it back to or thinking about that didn't really jive with you?
I actually have never liked Love, to be honest. It's
Mm.
a huge hit. It's at like 900 million on Spotify. It's
Yeah.
probably the second biggest hit on this album, honestly, after Humble. But I never really liked it as just kind of like a slower song. I never really liked like love song Kendrick, even though like he's good at it. It's just not really what I like to hear because I'd rather hear like something hard hitting like Element. Just my personal taste.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking of. But what about you?
Oh, like I said, Triple X featuring you
Right.
too is
Yeah.
just like what the fuck. I don't know. Give me any other
Yeah.
person to feature on that.
I think also like a bit of foreshadowing on Damn. If you listen for it, there are some lyrical out there takes or opinions from Kenny that are expressed on Damn, and of course we hear Kendrick more directly interrogate those opinions and thoughts on Mr. Morale. 5 years later, I think that was kind of like besides the point at the time because Damn was just the big commercial Kendrick record at the time, but yeah, I mean, in terms of like, again, like in terms of rappers making mainstream friendly music, like very few people can match something as artistic as Damn, even if Damn doesn't really hold up quite as well to Good Kid and To Pimp a Butterfly. So I still look finely on it, but I just have it in the next tier is all.
Yeah, and I think when we get to it, we'll both talk about it. But I think there's quite a big tier. Like I don't know, there's a huge like spacing between those tiers. Like it's just a
Hmm.
big jump because the top two are just so undeniable. But Dave, you mentioned it, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers 5-year wait, almost to the day. I guess 5 years in a month, May 13th, 2022. We talked about it.
Hmm.
Check out that review. But in the meantime, we did get a little bit of Kendrick here and there. Some singles dropped, like you mentioned, The Heart, Part 5. Did Part 4 drop between then too?
Part four was before Damn.
Gotcha. Okay. And then we also have the Black Panther, the album, which was curated by
Yes.
Kendrick and produced.
Yeah, about a little less than a year after Damn, February 2018, right before the movie came out. And yeah, I mean, in terms of movie soundtracks, curated soundtracks, it's about as good as it gets. It's not really a
Yeah.
Kendrick album, you know. There's some Kendrick moments on there, some songs that have lasted, like All the Stars with SZA. I think to me, my favorite moment was always Pandemic with SOB just like that energy from a at the time upstart group was really fun. But yeah, I think more than anything, it's like yeah, it's still a soundtrack album, but pretty high level for one of those. So cool to hear. Kind of not something we really expected from Kendrick at the time, just because it's a bit beneath him, honestly, for him to do something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's still some keepers on there. Of course, King's Dead, which
Yeah.
Kendrick is on, of course, was a big radio hit, bit of a meme, of course, with Future.
Yeah, and I think uh, in maybe like a decade or two, there will be people who are like, "Why did Kendrick do this?" But it's important to remember that this was like a moment. Like Black Panther was a cultural moment, and
Hmm.
pretty much every like black celebrity and person within black culture was excited and wanted to support this project and have it be successful.
And it was 700 million domestic.
Incredibly successful. Also, we'll go down as like a trailer Hall of Fame like
Oh
candidate.
yeah.
Like it's first ballot. Incredible trailer. Um, but Dave, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers were 4 months post its release. Has your opinion changed on this album at all?
No, I don't think so because I kind of realized at the time we talked about it a few weeks after it came out due to scheduling, and it was pretty clear right away that Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was certainly not Damn. It was not nearly as inviting and easy to revisit as Damn. And it's not as, I think, a fun concept to sit with the way Good Kid, Mad City is, or the way Pimp A Butterfly is. You know, not that those albums are always happy or positive, but it's easier, I think, to invest in like what those albums are about. Whereas Mr. Morale, quite admirably, is Kendrick at his most inward looking. He is exposing himself publicly like he never has before, quite distinctly. But what he's exposing is not always the most fun to sit with and hear. Part of that is Kendrick exposing beliefs about himself. You know, it's just I give him a lot of credit for releasing truly a one for me type record because
Mhm.
he of course had to know that there weren't any like really big hits on this. Like N95 has done pretty well, and Die Hard is like the third single has lasted a bit. I'm a big fan of Father Time due to that amazing Sampha
Yeah.
feature, so catchy. Really dying for a new Sampha album, but overall, I think more about the stuff that are like misses to me, right? Like We Cry Together with Taylor Page is this really raw,
Hmm.
emotional recording basically of like a domestic dispute between two partners. And it actually became a short film recently. But to me, like that's just a grating thing to hear. And of course, Auntie Diaries is kind of a failure of songwriting despite some well intentioned, you know, thoughts, and we talked about that more clearly on the album review. But yeah, it's a record where like it has strong qualities, but it is really uninviting. It is really uh, kind of closed off, despite the fact that it's actually Kendrick opening himself up like never before. But it's like you might not look like what you're seeing, and like I said, I appreciate Kendrick being like, I am put on this pedestal by people, by white people, by society, and I am a flawed person, and here's why. I think that is like a really admirable thing to put out there when you're in his position, and he
Uh,
does it, I think, in a good way. It is just not necessarily what I like to revisit. Is all.
yeah, and I think well, you are definitely not alone in that. It's also like a pretty long album, and I think that's the thing. Kendrick makes these long albums, but a lot of times because they're so cohesive, because the storytelling and the way he weaves in his commentary is really cohesive, it makes the albums feel a lot shorter to listen to. I was actually really surprised when I found myself like halfway through to Pimp a Butterfly, and I was like, oh, geez, I hadn't even thought about how many songs are going, but I just kind of was like in the zone with it. This is now an album that's not as easy to get in the zone, even from the first track, United in Grief. That's a song where there's like three or four different switch ups in the song, and none of them really allow you to really like sit with it and really like get into the song. It changes so quickly. And so, I think there are some tracks on this that, in listening back, I was like, oh, wow, I don't remember liking this as much. Purple Hearts really stood out as a song like that. I really enjoyed that track. Um, Savior with Baby Keem and Sam Do, I thought was better on listening through this time. And obviously, him and Keem have done a lot of work recently. They are cousins, and Keem's really, I think, benefited from Kendrick's, support. But yeah, it's
Won
it's
a
just
Grammy this
yeah,
year.
it's just not a album that I think has, like you said, as many songs you come back to, but that's intentional. This is personal, and I really appreciate that. Damn is this huge commercial success, and he's like, all right, I want to make what I want to make now, and they're like, "Yep, go for it." I On Spotify, the Heart Part Five is part of this album.
Right. It was added. It wasn't actually
Yeah,
there at the start. Classic streaming switch up on you. If you don't know, now you know, kind of
and
thing.
and the Heart Part, the Heart Part Five is really great.
Hmm.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably one of the standouts from this period. But yeah, I think it'll probably be remembered as a, a well done album, but just not one that people are
Right.
coming back to often.
Like there's a lot to admire about Mother I Sober, but like as an
Right.
album, it's not as fun, which is again totally all right, and it just makes the next Kendrick album even that much more intriguing. Of course, Mr. Morale was the final top dog album. Now we know Kendrick's next album will be on his newly formed multi flanged conglomerate PG Lang. We don't really know what PG Lang is, except that Kendrick is not on TDE anymore. I'm
Right.
a bit unclear if he's also not on Aftermath and Interscope anymore. Little unclear about that, but yeah, what PG Lang is and what Kendrick's next act is. Of course, we're eagerly anticipating that. And as you said, Keem has really benefited from his connection to Kendrick, having Kendrick on some of his songs, having Kendrick help him write, vice versa, stuff like that. Um, of course, Kendrick was on the Super Bowl halftime show earlier this year before Mr. Morale came out.
Hmm.
And I think a really important Super Bowl halftime show that was also like, I think, really awesome in its execution, having the LA Super Bowl with all the faces of LA hip hop through their connection to Dr. Dre. Like, I thought that was really cool. And have Kendrick, of course, be the most recent connection to Dre there was a lot of fun. Um, I'm not expecting as long a wait between albums the way we got between Damn and Mr. Morale. I wonder how much of that is that Mr. Morale is not that commercial. You know, I believe Kendrick has wrapped up his Mr. Morale tour that he did this summer. What's next? We haven't heard anything, but I'm sure we'll hear something soon.
I know. I'm hoping it's not 5 years. Hoping it's maybe a year. Yeah. Give us more Kendrick for sure. Um, Dave, should we do our rankings? And I have a few questions to wrap up. I think
Hmm.
the Kendrick discussion. Why don't you give me your rankings and I'll go through mine.
Yep. So, and again, like if you look at like the tiers on YouTube, these are tiers per Kendrick standards, not necessarily grades or anything.
Mhm.
So for me, in last, I have Untitled and Mastered, just because I don't really value it as an album, and I find it hard to do that because it's an unfinished compilation of demos. Like, yeah, it's still pretty good for those standards, but for Kendrick standards, it's at the bottom for me.
Yeah.
Then I have Overly Dedicated, followed by Section 80, both because I think those ones are the most dated of Kendrick's works, but also just the most. It's Kendrick still rising, still on the come up, still not yet
Mhm.
fully formed, but you can see what's to come, as we said. Uh, so that kind of brings us to like the full bodies of work. So from there, that would be number three, four, five, six, seven. So
5.
number four would be Miss Morale for all the reasons
Mhm.
we just said, and then number three, Damn, kind of predictably because it's not on the level of the other two, and then I have I actually messed this up on my graphic. I have Good Kid, Mad City 2 and Pimp A Butterfly 1. It's actually reversed on my graphic. Which I guess speaks to most people's opinions on it. It's like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
50-50 thing.
So our lists are very similar, unsurprising. I think Untitled Unmastered is the one that is going to be in different spots. So I have Overly Dedicated last, and then above that is Section 80, just albums I don't go back to as much. I then have Untitled Unmastered above those two. I,
Yeah.
the songs are just so high level for just being throwaways, and
Hmm.
I just enjoy listening to them more. And then we get into the more fully formed albums. Then Mr. Morale would be 4 for me. Damn would be 3. They're in their own tier for me, and then I would put Good Kid, Mad City, and Pimp a Butterfly. I guess if I had to like change the tiers up like you do, I'd probably put Damn in its own tier above Mr. Morale. And
Hmm.
Pimp a Butterfly, I have like just edging out Good Kid, Mad City. I think if I had to listen to one of them, I might come back to Good Kid, Mad City just because
Yeah, I kind of feel
those.
that way too.
Yeah.
It's like admiration and like critical evaluation versus like personal preference.
Enjoyment.
And it all
Exactly.
depends on how you make your list and what your philosophy is for how you actually rank stuff. But that's kind of where it comes down to me, where like I think both albums serve like two very different purposes when you're ranking them, despite
Right.
the fact that they're both good at both of those things. It's complicated, but it's because they're two amazing albums.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's I think you really summed it up well. But if we were like at a party with our friends and we put on "To Pimp a Butterfly," I think people would kind of be like, "Ah, this is good," but like, well, what do we? Why are we
It
listening to
depends
this?
on the song for
If we
sure.
put on "Good Kid, Mad City," the whole album, I think people would probably be singing along to it, and that probably just speaks to also the point of our lives when we we're able to listen to that and really like play those songs. So
Yeah.
can't really go wrong with either one. Um, Dave, favorite Kendrick collaborator for you?
Oh, that's a great question. In a sense, the boring answer is just like all of his producers for years and years, like
Yeah.
Dave Free and Soundwave and Ty Beast. Like he worked with those guys for over 10 years.
Mhm.
But that's kind of a lame answer, I guess. Um, Gotta be the Black Hippie guys, honestly, for me.
Mm.
Schoolboy Q. Whenever I heard them on any of their songs, um, whether it was on a J Rock album, whether it was a Black Hippie remix to a Kendrick song, whatever it was, I really thought that was a really genuine um thing in hip hop. And like obviously they've kind of moved apart just as their own careers have developed, and of course they became adults and aren't around each other as much as they used to be expected. But whenever we did hear them together on some of their early work, uh that was some of my favorite hip hop of like the early 2010s. So yeah, I guess
Damn.
the Black Hippie guys for me.
I thought for sure we were gonna have different answers to this, but I was gonna say Schoolboy. So we're pretty much the same there. And that actually kind of leads into my next question
I think
because
J. Cole is a good like other
yes,
answer too, whether it's producing or some of those like one-off singles that they're both on together.
yeah, he came to mind for me as well. My next question, but I'll kind of preface with one of my answers. One of my favorite Kendrick features is on Collard Greens from Schoolboy Q. I just
Hmm.
think he absolutely comes on, destroys that song. I already mentioned fucking Problems as another one of my favorites. And then I think obviously Family Ties is a more recent one.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Another one that he comes on and crushes. What are some of your favorite Kendrick features?
Well, you got a lot of the good ones. Blessed on the
Uh,
Schoolboy Q album
good one.
on Habits Contradictions. Amazing. We'd be remiss not to mention Control, technically a feature on a Big Sean song, of course, made a huge shitstorm when that happened. Very fun. That was a fun time to be a hip hop fan for sure.
Mhm.
I mean, he's got a lot of them, right? I think it's actually funny to think on like Kendrick features that are like kind of unsuccessful,
Yeah.
like um, like Goosebumps, Travis Scott,
Mm.
Monster Track, but the Kendrick feature isn't actually that good. It's like we don't really want to hear Kendrick like doing that kind of like sex talk. No
Yeah.
offense, this is not his strength. Um, I, I mean, yeah, tons of Black Hippie examples, of course. We don't need to belabor that, but I think kind of underrated would be for me is Rich the Kid's New Freezer featuring Kendrick Lamar, which only exists because Kendrick happened to walk into the studio when Rich the Kid was there and was like, actually, this song's not bad. Let me hop on this, and just
That's
doing Rich the
incredible.
Kid this amazing solid, like
Kendrick's the best.
4 years ago, whenever that was.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah, there's a ton of good examples, man.
All
Obviously,
right.
he was very prolific, like right away.
Yeah.
As soon as like Good Kid, Mad City came out, so there's tons of Kendrick features.
Um let me wrap up with this question. We obviously love Kendrick. If I said to you, Dave, you get to play like three Kendrick songs to like make someone love Kendrick, what would be the three you choose?
Money Trees
Hmm.
for sure. God, it's really hard.
It's
It's a
really
tough
hard,
question.
right?
Money Trees. I'm gonna take something from Tim Butterfly. All right. Money Trees. All right. And man, take your pick from there.
I think I'd probably throw Humble in there.
I was kind of thinking that too. It's like you
Yeah.
want like a hit.
Yeah, a real like banger for him.
Yeah, you can't really go
Um,
wrong though. There's so many permutations.
yeah, for me, it probably would be "Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe," "Humble," and then yeah, pick something off "Pimp a Butterfly," maybe the
Hmm.
single version. But yeah, this there's so many good choices there. I just wanted to kind of wrap it up with some love to some of the singles. But man, it's a pleasure talking about Kendrick. He's so great.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you like album rankings, check out all the other ones we've done. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. We did Drake, Cole, Tyler, Kanye, The Weeknd, Brockhampton, as well as movie directors Wes Anderson and Quentin Tarantino. More rankings to come. So make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod.
And we'll catch you next week with a regular Nostalgia podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Take
Get
care.
that.